hear now from Nathan Gonzales. He's the deputy editor of the Rothenberg Political Report, which is, as you may know, a nonpartisan political publication that covers the House and various campaigns and presidential politics. He's been there for more than a dozen years and is a contributing writer for Roll Call, which you're all familiar with. As you may notice, I'm not reading everybody's full bio because there's no point in spending that time. So I would encourage all of you to read the full bio that we provided for all of the speakers, because they're all more well qualified than I'm actually giving them credit for in the introduction. So I'm going to leave you with Nathan, who's going to give us sort of a big picture discussion about covering campaigns.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I might stand. Is that okay with you all? I know it's mid-afternoon. Everyone's probably, I don't know how many hours you've had someone talking at you. I want to try to do a few things with our time together. I want to try to tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am, because that might be useful to you, or might evoke some questions about why I'm even qualified in the least bit to stand up here in front of you. Also, I want to talk about redistricting specifically and how that impacts congressional races, and try to give you a little bit of a foundation of knowledge. And I realize there's probably varying levels of knowledge on the redistricting process, so I'll probably start from a pretty basic level and then work, and we'll probably pick people up along the way in terms of that. And then I could talk a little bit about how we see this cycle going. I mean, we are laser focused on the House and the Senate and those fights, and so we can go any number of directions. We can talk about kind of how we do what we do. We can talk about what's actually going on, anything that's useful to you. So my goal is not to talk at you the entire time, because I will get bored. My goal is to give you some initial information and background, and then hopefully we can just have a good discussion and lead wherever you all want to lead this. So a little bit of bio, a little bit more bio about me, fill in some lines here that you can read. I've always been interested in journalism and writing. Growing up, we had the neighborhood lemonade stand. My friend sold the lemonade. I sold Star Wars stories, like my own additions to the movies. I don't think that it exactly matched the storyline that occurred in the subsequent movies. But it's always been about writing. And then in high school and college, it kind of merged into the meatloaf in college. Where does the mystery meat? Where did this come from? Didn't we see this before? And I sort of didn't have a direction. But then I did one semester. I did a semester in Washington program when I was a senior as an undergrad. And I kind of caught it's cliche, but I caught the Potomac fever, and I figured out that politics was something that I wanted to write about. And I think part of the reason why I caught the Potomac fever was that my internship was in the White House press office. Now, to date myself a little bit, this was a couple of presidents ago under President Clinton. So yes, I was a Clinton intern, not the most famous one, but another one. And but just to be in that, my table, it wasn't even a desk, but my table was on the other side of the wall from the briefing room, where the press secretary and sometimes the president. My table with the phones that I was in charge of answering was just on the other side. And so just to be in the proximity to both some of the powerful people in the White House, but also proximity to some Terry Hunt of the Associated Press, Helen Thomas of UPI at the time, just to be around those sort of people was just phenomenal. I think that's what helped kind of fuel my interest in politics. So I did that. That was the fall of my senior year. I went back to California. I went to a small school. But as I was finishing my spring semester, I was trying to find a job out here. And I found a job, I found a job at CNN. And at the time, it was the political part of the website called allpolitics.com. And it was amazing. I mean, I was doing all the grunt work, but I thought, this is, I'm interested in journalism and politics. I get a job at CNN. I'm never going to have another job in my life. This is, this is fantastic. And for, I would say, about 7 months, it was great. It was right there in the 2000 election, which is a very exciting election cycle. But if some of you know your media history, I would probably be concerned about you. But right around the inauguration, there was the AOL Time Warner merger. And basically they thought, well, we have all these new AOL employees, so we'll just fire all the CNN.com employees. But because I was the lowest man on the totem pole, they just moved me over to the television side, where I worked as an associate producer on a show called Capital Gang, which on Saturday night was Mark Shields, Bob Novak, Margaret Carlson, and it was great. I don't have anything against those people, but it started to become kind of a lifestyle. First of all, I figured out I wanted to write. I wanted to get back to writing and write a little bit more. Oh, that's starting to get a tan, I think. I figured out that I wanted to get back to writing something longer than the little packages or intros or outros that you do in the TV world. And also, it honestly became a lifestyle issue. I was working Wednesday through Sunday because I was also helping on Wolf Blitzer's Sunday show. And at first you think, oh, wow, Monday, everyone's at work, I can get all these things done. And then Tuesday, I got everything done. All my friends are at work. And then I'm working Saturday nights. I'm waking up early, working Sunday mornings. And I'm like, this is not amazing. And so my first boss at CNN used to work for a gentleman named Stu Rothenberg. She knew that I wasn't completely happy in the new position. She knew that he was looking for someone new to come work for something at the Rothenberg Political Report. And so she said, why don't you guys talk? And that was 13 years ago. Now, to my friends and family, taking a position from CNN, which most people have heard of, something called the Rothenberg Political Report, isn't exactly viewed as an amazing career move. But for various reasons, like I said, for the writing that I was interested in, for the lifestyle, the quality of life issues, I don't have any regrets. And I didn't even know that the Rothenberg Political Report, or kind of this little niche journalism thing called political handicapping, existed. This wasn't my life goal. I didn't grow up reading the Almanac of American Politics. I sort of fell into it, but now that I am in it, it's pretty amazing. And one of the things that I like about it is that we get to cultivate sources on both sides of the aisle. We're a part of the media, but we're not in the breaking news rush. I mean, I have broken a few stories over the years, but it literally is almost by accident. But I think we specialize in trying to bring context to the political discussion, and when something happens, take a deep breath and be able to pause before trying to do instant analysis. Now, I know some of you, depending on your outlets and your job and your roles, you have to do that instant analysis. That's what's required of you. And all of us are playing certain parts of the game. But it's something that I appreciate about what I get to do. Another thing, and we could talk about this more later, that I enjoy is that we meet with candidates. We interview candidates face to face. We interview between 150 and 200 candidates for office every election cycle. And it's fascinating because, we'll sit down in a room. I'm usually there, Stu Rothenberg, the reporter for Roll Call, because we share offices with Roll Call. My cubicle is a few feet from Connor's. We sit down together and we start with very difficult questions, like, what is your date of birth? Where were you born? And actually, two candidates that have refused to tell me their date of birth over the years. One woman was offended that I asked, and one guy was concerned about his security, which I then found his date of birth online with like a 2-minute Google search. But we start that way intentionally to try to get to know these candidates, but also sort of work into what will then be potentially more difficult questions about either things in their past that we know are going to come up in a campaign, or policy issues. And our goal of these interviews is not to play gotcha. We don't record them. I don't have a video record. We don't video them. I don't even tape record them. I tend to feel like that puts candidates and people on edge a little bit, and so we use it as background information as we analyze the races going further into the cycle to help us with our analysis, and it can be very helpful. I'll give you two examples on the spectrum. Last cycle in California's 21st district, which is Northern California, there was a candidate. I'll lay the groundwork a little bit. There was a candidate. The district is President Obama won it in 2008. majority Hispanic district. I would call it a Democratic-leaning district just by the numbers. So Democrats, their candidate was a guy named John Hernandez, who was the president of the Central Valley Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So when you look at all this on paper, or you read about it, in the hotline, you think, okay, Hispanic district, Democratic district. You have the president of the Central Valley Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. What could possibly go? Perfect. Democrats are set. Well, John Hernandez came in, and it quickly became apparent, and honestly, almost a little bit sad, that he was out of his league. That's probably the best way that I could put it. We ended up talking a little bit about his father's health problems and how that was kind of inspiring him to run, which I don't want to take that away from him, but he was not a top-tier candidate. And actually, Stu and I were in the meeting, and we had a colleague at the time, Jessica Taylor, who was a little bit late to the meeting, and she came to the, she came up to the door, and Stu goes over the door. He's like, no, don't come in. And Jessica thought she was in trouble for being late, but it's like, we cannot jeopardize any more resources in this meeting. This is not, let's go spend your time elsewhere. But after that meeting, Democrats and everyone started to catch on that this candidate was not going to be able to win this seat, and they tried to recruit another Democrat in the race. He was a Fresno city councilman. Fresno's not in the district. Minor thing, which you didn't have to live. You don't have to live in the congressional district you represent, but it helps. And so now the long story. That's a long story. That district is represented by Republican Congressman David Valadao, and Democrats have a better nominee this time, but having a term of incumbency has strengthened Congressman Valadao, and he's going to be difficult to beat this time. They're going to have to try to beat him in 2016 with a presidential turnout. So that's one end of the spectrum, John Hernandez. The other end of the spectrum is a candidate. We got a call from a Democratic fundraiser. He said, this is back in September of 2002. He said, I have a candidate I want you to meet. But there's one small issue, that he's running in 2004. Like, well, September of 2002, we're kind of focused on the elections that are 2 months ahead, not 2 years ahead. He said, no, I really think you should meet him. Like, okay, well, what's his name? He says, his name is Barack Obama. Like, oh my God. How in the world is a person named Barack Obama going to get elected to the United States Senate? So he said, no, you really should meet him. So in September of 2002, over 2 years before that seat came up, then State Senator Obama was already running for the United States Senate. And we met with him, and he was engaging. He was basically everything that John Hernandez was not, Barack Obama was. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you, oh, this guy's going to be president of the United States, because that would be ridiculous, and I didn't think it. And actually, he had a lot of help on the way. Some of his primary opponents just imploded in that race, and that helped him. But these interviews are, I think, give us some qualitative information that is helpful in handicapping races. We do use quantitative information. We're not pollsters, but we digest as many polls as possible. And right now, at this point in the election cycle, we have the candidate interviews and all that information floating in our head, but it's all about the polls. And it's not just about the public polls. It's about what private polling we can get our eyes and ears on, because and I think you had a polling session before, so I don't want to, and I'm not sure what you all discussed, but we have a slightly different take than most, I think, on public versus partisan polling, in that it's my, it seems like there is a higher value given to nonpartisan media polls. And I actually think the opposite in most cases, because to me, if a media outlet is sponsoring a poll, their goal is to get a news story. And their goal is not to necessarily get it right. To them, if Mark Pryor is up 5 points or Mark Pryor is down 5 points, it doesn't really matter. They get the news story out of it. But when you look at partisan polling, there is an incentive to get the polls right, because these campaigns and these committees or these outside groups are making strategic decisions based on the outcome of that poll or what they learn from that poll. And you have to take everything with a grain of salt, look through it with a proper filter. Don't make any rash judgment based on any singular poll, but you can learn a lot from good partisan polling. And there have been problems with partisan polling. In 2010, Republican pollsters were quicker in identifying kind of the wave that we saw in the 2010 elections. In 2012, the Democratic pollsters were much better, and Republican pollsters did not accurately project what the electorate was going to look like. And so you have to balance all of those things in your mind. But I guess what I'm telling you is that you don't, that we value both partisan and nonpartisan polling, and I think it all comes together to start to make a more clear picture. I do a few other things. I do contribute to Roll Call's politics team as kind of they have great political reporters that are in charge of regions, and I sort of try to fill in the gaps, or if there's things that I see by being able to look at things more broadly or nationally, that I try to fill in the gaps there. And the other thing that I started a couple years ago was a website called politicsinstereo.com. I have somewhat of an entrepreneurial itch that my wife probably wishes I didn't necessarily have. But my goal with, and it's still developing, you can check it out, but my goal with Politics in Stereo is to identify the best state-based reporters or writers or bloggers on the left, on the right, and who's the go-to political voice in each state, and line them up side by side in 3 columns, so that it gets people beyond the first filter. I know you're surprised people are skeptical of the media, and I think giving them that initial filter is, I think, helpful. I'm hoping that it's helpful. So go on the website. If you could just click over and over and over and over and over again, that would be very helpful. But it's a work in progress, and actually we're working on actually changing it pretty substantially. Not the fundamentals of the 3 columns, but just how it works and make it faster. So we can come back to all that. I wanted to talk a little bit about redistricting, and I don't want to insult you all. Some of you who might even be more of an expert than I am, but I think it is very useful to establishing a foundation for your political reporting. So to start from a very basic point, we have a census every 10 years. After the census, we go through reapportionment, where states either gain or lose congressional districts based on a gain or loss in population. And the goal of this is that each representative should represent roughly the same amount of people. After the 2000 census, it was roughly 660,000 people was the basic goal. Now it's over 700,000 is the basic target for a congressional district. So through the reapportionment process, we have states gaining and losing seats. So when it just happened after the 2010 census, New York lost 2 seats, Ohio lost 2 seats, Illinois, Michigan, New Jersey, Iowa, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, and Missouri, or Missouri, I think if you're a Republican, all lost 1 seat. So those are all the states that lost seats. In order to maintain 435, those seats have to go to the states that gained population. Texas, anybody know how many seats Texas gained? 4, close, good. Florida, 2 seats. South Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Washington all gained 1 seat. And that also impacts the Electoral College. I mean, that took effect before the 2012 elections. But it's not just about the House, it's about affecting the Electoral College as well. So census, reapportionment, redistricting. So once we know how many seats each state has, then they go through the redistricting process. And even states that don't gain or lose a seat still go through the redistricting process, because there's probably been a population shift within the particular state. So they have to try to maintain that balance. I want to give you a website that you should check out for more specifics. If you just go to, it's at Loyola's Law School. If you type in redistricting and Loyola Law School, there's a lot of great detail that I won't go into because you're all very capable people that can read, and some states are going to be more interesting to you depending on your beats and what you cover. But in general, a majority of the states, the state legislature is empowered to draw the lines, and the governor has approval or veto power. So it's very critical before in a election cycle that ends in a 0 to do well, because then that will help you be in control of more state legislatures and hold more governorships in order to have this power. So Democrats chose a very poor time, I know that they planned it, a very poor time to get wiped out in an election in the 2010 elections, because that handed over more legislatures to the Republicans, and Republicans then were able to draw congressional lines that will be in place for the next decade. And I know someone, you here have the Nate Cohen of the Upshot of New York Times. You should all read that, either steal that copy or just read it online, because Nate in that one talks about how it's not just how the House majority, Republican advantage in the House majority has to do with redistricting, but it's not solely based on redistricting because of what's kind of called sorting, where you often live in communities that are like-minded. And that then becomes difficult, particularly on because Democrats tend to be more concentrated in urban areas. If you're trying to draw competitive congressional districts, it's difficult to carve up those communities in order to make them competitive. I'll come at that a little bit different way in a second to try to make it. But so state legislatures are important. Holding governorships are important, but those aren't the only ways that lines are drawn. Some states have bipartisan legislative commissions, like in Iowa. Some California just went to a citizen redistricting commission, which literally you could just there was a lottery. I mean, there was I think a dry cleaner on the commission. Anybody could submit their name to be a part of this citizen commission. They drew the names. Now, it got a little bit, because it is a somewhat complex process, there are firms and people that have to help. It has become easier for the average person to go, and you can draw your own congressional lines, but they still had to have some help. But there's a nonpartisan, there is a movement that some people are trying to push for nonpartisan commissions. Now you say, well, why don't all states have a nonpartisan commission? Or why don't all states go to this process? And it's because the law has to be changed in each state. And how do you change a law in each state? It either has to be by a citizen initiative that you put on the ballot, or the state legislature has to put it on the ballot as a referendum. So state legislatures aren't often going to do that, because state legislatures are full of people who want to be members of Congress. So why take the power? If I'm the speaker of the Missouri State House, we'll say the Illinois State House, which they've had the same speaker for about 100 years, I think, Mike Madigan. But why would I give up the power to potentially draw a district for me? Why would I give up that power? And I think most state legislatures are not going to do that. So the other way to do it is by doing the petitions according to the laws in each state, and ordering to citizens to put the initiative on. And that has worked in some states, but it can often take multiple cycles, because I think with any ballot initiatives, if people don't understand it, their initial inclination is to vote no. They start to read all this stuff, and I don't know. I'm just gonna vote no, and it can take a couple of cycles for people to figure out if they really want to do it or not. I mean, in California, Governor Schwarzenegger proposed not a citizen commission, but it was a commission that a group of retired judges would draw the lines, and it failed miserably. I mean, he got it didn't even come close. And so it took multiple cycles for kind of the concept of a redistricting reform to come through. So I think we'll probably see more states move toward that, but it might not be as quick as you think. I mean, it's not just a natural. It's not inevitable that it's going to happen, is what I'm trying to say. So what does this have to do with you? Well, because of the power of redistricting and the ability to draw seats that are either very safe Democratic or very safe Republican, so really on our list of competitive seats of the Rothenberg report, we have 51 competitive districts out of 435. The rest are either safe Republican or safe Democratic. And in that, it's an ongoing discussion, but the general election result is not in doubt in hundreds of House districts. Now, I think what's happened over the past few cycles is as people realize that the importance of primaries and interest groups having more of an impact on primaries has increased, because they realize, well, this is a safe Democratic seat, so if we want to get our person in there or someone who's faithful to our values, we got to win this primary, because once they win the primary, the general election is set. And so I guess it's important to realize what type of whichever state you're in or whichever districts you're covering, to realize what is the landscape, what is the foundation of these districts, and is this a general election district, is this a primary district, because that dramatically affects the players, the candidates, and it dramatically affects just the general handicapping and reporting of the race. I think that might be what I might stop there on redistricting. There's a lot of different directions I feel like we could go. Do you have questions at this point? Questions? Mm-hmm.
Question. I know I read your stuff for like races I'm covering. I have one in Nevada, one of those like kind of swing districts.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all, in addition to interviewing the candidates, often say like Democrats in general. Democrats feel this candidate, isn't viable anymore. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Are you covering Aaron Bilbray and Joe Heck? Okay, so we are in this. It's this funny niche where again we're reporters, but we're also analysts, and we talk to. I would say I talk to the majority of my sources on background, which means I can use the I take it to mean, and I hope that that we can use the information, but not attributable to a specific person or their specific building or job where they work. And so sometimes that leads us to write something like Democrats or Democratic strategists, and we're having faith that our readers believe that we're talking to the right people or people that are in positions of influence, to kind of read between the lines. But we're hoping, but by talking to our sources at that level, we're hopefully getting a level of candor that we wouldn't get if we were asking them to speak on the record. And where things like she's talking about the 3rd District of Nevada, where there's the Democratic nominee, a woman named Aaron Bilbray, who at the beginning of the cycle was a pretty highly touted, I would say top 10 or top 20 Democratic candidate in the country. But as the race has progressed, there's been some disappointment among Democratic strategists that she hasn't been running a great campaign, maybe micromanaging her campaign. And so you say, well, what does that matter? Well, I think it matters because if the people that are directing money and resources for campaign ads in the final stretch, if they don't believe that a candidate is a good investment, then they're not going to spend money there. And that's going to be more difficult then for that candidate to win. And so I guess that's why you see some of that phrasing. And honestly, talking to some, as a whole, talking to sources on background, I would say has been beneficial. I have been burned. And I know that I think this is all on the record, so I'll be. I
have a reporter right
there. This will be on YouTube. I have been burned, so I'll just leave unnamed. Someone floated a piece of opposition research to me, and it actually was only 2 sentences of about a 2,500 word story, but surprisingly, that piece of opposition research, there was more to it. And I got a very angry phone call from a consultant for that candidate, and they were right. I was wrong because I didn't see the whole picture, and I don't talk to that person. I don't talk to that source anymore. And actually, I wonder if that source even realizes it, because they have reached out in the future, and I just ignore him. So there are downsides, and I guess you kind of have to. It's a good reminder to be careful.
Another question.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs to me that at the time when you interviewed Barack Obama, he was saying publicly that he wasn't going to run, or he was still thinking about it. So is there anyone that you're interviewing now who's in that same position now, who's saying that they're still thinking about it?
Well, we aren't interviewing presidential candidates, but there are a lot that are already running in 2016. No one really fits that bill exactly. I mean, he was, at the time, getting some blowback, even among Democrats in Illinois, who were saying, well, let's hold on. Let's get through the 2002 elections first. But honestly, there isn't anyone as brazen as that.
And do you have any insight about how some of these candidates are recruited and groomed and sort of put out into the public sphere? Because I cover, one of the states that covers North Carolina, and Clay Aiken, of course, in NC2, who, it's a redistrict district where he probably doesn't have a chance, but still, he seems to have come out of nowhere. So how does that happen?
So I think there's a spectrum of candidates, a spectrum of how the candidates come to be. I would say that the most, not the most likely, the most, I'm missing a word here. Anyway, the most common would be that people want to run, whether it's a state senator, a member of the state house, a businessman, a businesswoman. They kind of have this urge, and then they start to talk to people that are in the local Democratic Party, and it kind of filters up from there and might get to the DCCC or the NRCC. There are at times they'll have meetings here in Washington, the DCCC and the NRCC. Meetings among members of the delegation that they'll say, hey, we need someone to run in Nevada's 3rd district. Who do you know? Who is out there, and do we need to approach someone? I think that the idea of recruiting, I don't think it happens a lot where you're recruiting someone from absolutely no, I don't want to run, to running. I think some people are already primed, and they have it in their mind that they want to run, and then they're just kind of helped, and then they get a lot of people saying, oh yeah, you'd be great, and then they come into our interviews like, everyone I talk to says I'm amazing and I'm going to win. I'm like, well, surprise, surprise. Let me show you a poll. And that's why, honestly, and probably step on multiple toes through the course of this interview, but the idea of recruiting, stories about recruiting success or failures that are on the committees, I think a lot of it is out of their control. And more specifically, these people have, they've either made up their mind beforehand, or they have real lives. And, a candidate committee can't control if they want a specific woman to run and she has 3 young kids at home, and say, well, and she says, I'm not going to run, and they say, well, that's a recruiting failure. Like, well, they can't control. There's only certain things that the party strategist can control. So it's a very meandering answer that I'm not even sure I reached a clear, concise point. Was it even close?
No, I was thinking of like Michael Steele, the former RNC chairman, who talked a lot about recruiting candidates and recruiting different types of candidates, and he wasn't successful in doing that for a number of reasons.
What the parties can do is try to help get candidates that try to make it easier for candidates who are not personally wealthy. I think there is a bias in our system toward candidates who have personal wealth, because you're probably going to have to run for 18 months And if you don't have the personal resources to sustain a life or a family for 18 months without a real job, I don't know how you do it. So if you want to broaden the pool beyond a typical wealthy businessman or businesswoman, you have to kind of put these in place, help these candidates raise money in order to become a viable candidate, or else you're just going to get the same type of person. We'll go back here first.
Which of the candidate interview questions would you recommend that we might want to borrow when we do our own candidate backgrounding chats? Any that kind of get at things in an unusual way that we might not think of?
That's a good question.
Or that surprise you sometimes.
Part of it depends on probably your purposes. I mean, we go through a lot, and I think sometimes the roll call reporters, and they're my friends, and I think sometimes, oh my goodness, because they don't necessarily need to know where all these people went to college. But to me, that helps build a background of who they are. I think basic questions like, for either side, I mean, is there an issue or two that you differ from, a national Democrat or a national Republican? Or right now we'll ask Democrats, is there an issue or two where you disagree with President Obama? And just trying to leave things as open-ended as possible. We'll even give them a little bit of time to say, what are the 2 or 3 issues that you're talking about on the stump? And you might already know those already, but just hearing them, making sure that you know what the campaign is about. But that's also a question that I think we use. We're giving away all our secrets. We use to kind of not to get them off of the defensive. Like if you come in guns blazing, you're probably not going to get a lot of useful information. But sometimes easier questions can be used to your advantage if later you have something that you really need to confront them on. Earlier in my career, what gets awkward is when you know a piece of juicy information and you think it's going to come up in the campaign and you feel like you need to ask about it. There was a candidate running in an unnamed state that rhymes with Colorado, who I was just doing some brief research before the candidate interview, and I saw in the local paper, this wasn't on an anonymous blog, that the candidate was having marital difficulties. And it was in the local paper with the local political reporter, so I thought, well, this might come up. And so I went out to greet the candidate for the interview, and who was there but his wife? And it was awkward. And honestly, at that point in my career, I didn't ask about it. And in these interviews, we kind of have a good cop, bad cop sort of thing, and Stu usually plays the bad cop, and I play the good cop. And Stu wasn't in that particular meeting, or else he probably would have just been like, "What in the world? What the heck? What's going on here?" And actually, now at this point, I might have said the same thing. And I believe after the election that the marriage they were divorced. But
so if the wife had not been there, would you have asked it?
I think I would have been more likely to.
And so conversely, do you think the candidate brought the wife so that you would not ask it?
Absolutely. I mean, I say absolutely when I don't know that for sure. But I think it was a strategic decision. I'm of the opinion in general in politics that there are very few accidents, particularly when it comes to the White House or a high level. I mean, they say, oh, he just had this meeting or said there aren't accidents, I don't think. But in well-managed campaigns, I think they're very strategic decisions.
Why did you think it would have been a problem? Like the fact that he was having marriage problems? What was
because it was, I mean, I didn't know for sure, but the fact that it was already into the local press, just as a way to discredit him. I mean, we're in this environment where few things are off the table. I mean, you're trying to discredit your opponent in every way, and if that means somehow the person's personal life is in disarray, then and it gets to be a tough thing because, from my standpoint, I don't I'm not trying to pick and choose what issues matter in a campaign. I'm just trying to figure out what issues are going, what's being talked about in a particular district or state, and try to figure out what the political consequences or ramifications of it are. And because it was a discussion point at the time in the race, that's
So did he
I
win?
wanted to. He did.
And then what happened once he got divorced?
I mean, he keeps getting reelected. You guys, there's only like a few members of that delegation.
What metrics?
Oh,
do you-
sorry. I'll come. Go ahead. And,
No, you-
okay, here.
Well, I was going to ask, you mentioned that you're not in the sort of instant cycle. Many of us are. What would you say reporters in the instant cycle should, do a better job of thinking about or not forget about?
I guess I'll broadly refer to context in trying to, if you're writing up I'll back up a second. Stu usually talks about, there's a Democratic pollster named Mark Mellman, who is one of the most respected Democratic pollsters. He has said for years, at least we've been attributing it to him for years, that 90% of what happens in elections doesn't matter. The problem is that we don't know always what's in that 10%. And I think the knee-jerk reaction, and some of it is pressure from your editors to produce content, is to treat everything like it's in that 10%. And so I guess trying to craft your stories in a way that doesn't treat everything like a game changer. It might be a game changer, but you probably won't know that within the first 24 hours of a particular news event happening. So, you could even get multiple stories out of one event. The initial story is what happened. Just be, this is what happened. The subsequent story is this happened, and then the polling moved. This candidate was up 1, now they're down 3, and you could start to kind of connect the dots that way. Or you might see this, we thought that this debate was going to be the game changer in the race, and we look at the polling afterward, and there's no change. And so I guess it's the lack of just knowing what you don't know can be helpful. Knowing that, all right, this happened, it looked important, it looked like a major misstep, might be a mistake, but we have to wait and see whether it actually affected the dynamic of the race.
In terms of your race ratings, I'm just wondering what the metrics are, like how many there are and how specific they are. And just as background, at ABC we're covering 14, or we're focusing and profiling 14 races.
Senate?
Senate and House. I
Okay.
have there were like 2 House races, and I have one of them, 2nd District in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
But we cite on all of our profiles the Rothenberg rating.
Yes. The best. No. So we don't have, and this can be frustrating to a lot of people, we don't have a magic formula or even a specific statistical model. We are using all sorts of information from the historic partisanship of the partisanship of the district, historic voting patterns of the district, candidates, the candidate strengths and weaknesses, which is where part of the interviews come in, candidate fundraising, party spending, outside spending, who's kind of controlling the debate of the race, and then it becomes polling. By this time in the cycle, I would say for 18 months of the cycle, you start to develop scenarios in your mind. Like, based on what we've known and how the district has voted in the past, we think this is where the race is going to end up. Like, kind of come back to Nevada's 3rd district. Based on the partisanship of the district, it should be competitive. Erin Bilbray is the daughter of a former congressman who has access to money. She's been in the political game a long time. Joe Heck is the congressman, is I would say a good congressman. Why I say my good, he's not tainted with a specific scandal or something wrongdoing. So we thought this was going to be one of the most competitive races in the country. Now when you look at polling, it's not. And it might be, the worst thing we can do as handicappers is completely say, this is what I decide 3 months before the election, and nothing will change. That's the worst decision that I could make. But it's not. But I know that there are more popular. It's become popular to have and more attention on statistical models. And when we talk, so our ratings, we have lean and favored, and we have this unique category called toss-up tilt. And you might say, well, that's silly, but it's actually our way of not trying to have fewer races in pure toss-up. Because then we feel like we're not really doing a service to our readers if we're just going to throw 30 races into toss-up. Well, what's the point? But I also feel like, and I'm definitely not a Nate Silver basher or anything like that, but sometimes I feel like saying that Mitch McConnell has a 74.1% chance of winning versus a 78.6% chance of winning, I just don't know. I mean, I think Mitch McConnell's going to win, but I think that portrays a level of preciseness that I'm not sure actually exists.
So following up on that, because the ratings change,
sure.
So what's most likely to move the needle for you guys?
At this point, polling. I mean, if there are polls that, let's take a specific. Okay, we'll take a specific real-time example. In New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Senate race, I think we have been skeptical that a senator from Massachusetts would move to New Hampshire and be able to defeat an incumbent Democrat in New Hampshire. We've started as skeptical. There have been, and so we've had it in the favored column. There have been recent polls. We'll leave the one Democratic poll out that they just released today that was +8. But there have been other public polls and private polls that show that it's a closer race, maybe something closer to 4 or 5. So we're considering moving it to lean because we think that there's something has happened. And in a way, at this point, it matters how it shifted, but just if we think it shifted based on the evidence that we're seeing, that's what matters the most. Now, earlier in the cycle, it is based a little bit more on scenarios, who we think is a particularly strong candidate or who isn't a strong, how is their fundraising, how is their campaign operation going. That's it's a little less data-driven because there's just less data in general to be digested. I forgot to talk about Clay Aiken. Does everyone know that Clay Aiken is running for Congress?
Yeah.
I mean, so I think
His opponent died.
Yeah.
So Clay Aiken barely won the Democratic primary, and then his opponent tragically died.
The day he said he was going to not call for a recount.
Yeah, because it was close and there was a potential for a recount. So stunning. As far as Clay Aiken, I think he wanted to run, and he reached out Democrats helped connect him with people that could help him run. But when you look at his, I think he's kind of playing candidate. Meaning, he's putting some money in and then he'll spend it, and he's not kind of building what I would call a traditional campaign for anybody. And also, I think it's a Republican district. And even though there are probably Republicans that like Clay Aiken and listen to his music, the moment you put yourself out there with a D behind your name, they're like, whoa, we're not going to go that far. So anyway, I knew I was forgetting a piece. So out of the broad spectrum of people that kind of have ratings and stuff, I would say that the Cook folks are most similar with what we do in terms of methodology. I mean, I think David Wasserman on the House side digs a little deeper into like precinct level data than what I do personally, and I think part of that is because the Cook operation, they have David doing the House, Jennifer doing the Senate, and Governor. And so they probably go a little deeper, honestly, sometimes. And at the Rothenberg report, Stu and I both do everything together, which I think helps with context, knowing how the Senate and House races all line up together within a state. But I guess it comes back to the Cook folks. I consider them, they're competitors, but friends. Then you kind of start to reach into, lots of people have ratings now, and I don't weight them the same necessarily.
Do the Cook people bring everybody in for interviews that you guys?
No, I think I don't know this for sure. I mean, they're a completely different side of town and building, but I think on the House stuff, David mainly does them, and Charlie Cook does some of. I mean, maybe a few. And the same goes with if it's a Senate candidate, Jennifer will do it. But I think Stu meets with more candidates than Charlie does. I mean, just being honest. And the Cook folks, they share offices with National Journal, but I don't know, honestly, what maybe, is there anybody here from National Journal? I don't know if the National Journal sits in on the candidate interviews.
That's above my pay grade.
We'll give you a pass.
I think they work with Hotline a little bit.
Okay.
National Journal Hotline, but in terms of like the National Journal website and magazine, I think it's pretty separate.
Why
there
do
you
you think they sit with you? Like why
good question.
Why would hundreds come and sit down with you? Why not let you just look at the poll numbers and figure it out on your own?
So that's a great question. We don't have a large readership. I'm not getting rich on this, but some of our key readers are people that donate to candidates, whether it's individuals or political action committees, government affairs offices that give money to candidates. So how it all works, that candidates come to them and they say, my name is Nathan Gonzales, I'm running in Nevada's 3rd district, that's my go-to district. I'm running in Nevada's 3rd district, I'm going to win, give me $5,000. And they say, and they have hundreds of candidates coming in telling them this. So they say, okay, hold on. Let me go to the Rothenberg report, let me go to the Cook report and see, is this race even, does this matter for the majority? Is this candidate a viable candidate, and does this candidate have a chance of winning? What are the other players or dynamics going on in the race? So candidates, I think, want to come and make a positive impression or make their case to us as to why they're going to win, in order to then demonstrate, it's almost a level of credibility, demonstrate that, okay, yeah, this is a candidate running in this is a front runner candidate running in a top 10 House race in the country, because that can affect their I think I'm not overstating I'm really not trying to overstate our influence, but that it can be a credential for the viability of their race. Does that make?
And more often than not, you're right.
We're right enough. I mean, I guess right about projecting the announce or evaluating candidates. I guess those are two.
Projecting who wins.
The dirty secret of this is that anybody could project a vast majority of the races because of the redistricting component that I saw. But I think part of our advantage is introducing readers to the candidates and trying to, before people really know who they are, and trying to identify trends before they come. One of the stories I'm honestly most proud about is that in the spring of 2013, no, that was just last year. The spring of 2011, I wrote a story about how Dick Lugar could be in trouble in the primary. And at the time, Dick Lugar was winning easily in the polls. But based on my analysis of kind of the general Tea Party movement, seeing what had happened in primaries in the past, judging the senator's strengths and weaknesses, including not having a place to live in Indiana and staying at a hotel when he goes back, that I wrote an analysis, and we got a lot of heat. One of the main kind of veteran political reporters from the state, called us and was like, "You guys are crazy." And like, well, we might be. I'll leave open that possibility, but it turned out to being correct. So trying to identify some of the longer term, I think our ratings aren't necessarily even the most useful thing that we do. I think it's trying to lay that groundwork for, these are the candidates, these are the issues that could make an impact in the race, and this is what's going to happen. I think we might be more useful. We might be more useful in the off year or the spring before the election than right now, when people start to get a sense from multiple outlets what's exactly happening.
I was just going to ask a follow-up. I mean, are there certain times of the year, or if I'm not every day covering races, is there a certain time of the year that I should make sure that I plug into you?
All the time. No. It just, I guess it varies on what you want to know. You know, what you want to know when you.
Dick Lugar, you know, forward-thinking trend before, you know, not November perhaps, and maybe not October, but when does something like that maybe start to come to enough fruition where you're able to start coming up with some interesting stuff? I think it's, and I'm not trying to dodge. It's almost kind of like until it happens. Until it happens. In terms of our coverage decisions, so we have right now, and this is a kind of a shifting time where we publish twice a month, 2 issues a month, and so we try to methodically go through and make sure we cover in depth each competitive Senate race at least one time, like with a 3,000 word deep dive into the race, and then we'll update it from there. So in order to do that over the course of an election cycle, it takes multiple months in order to get that. And so that's kind of what we do through the off year, and then as we get to the on year, it's more shorter updates as necessary as developments happen. I hope I'm making sense.
I have 2 questions. Based on the Tea Party candidates that you've interviewed, how have you seen that movement change over time? And also, have you noticed the difference in the way that the female candidates are pitched to you to be interviewed, or the way that they're presented to you versus the male candidates? So
I'll start with the first one, Tea Party. I mean, I think we weren't even talking about Tea Party. I mean, it wasn't even a label when I first started. I mean, it was a 2009 sort of phenomena. And that's one of the questions that we'll ask. We'll go back to, we'll ask Republicans, and not try to be confrontational about it, but just say, do you consider yourself a member of the Tea Party? And that can kind of elicit a lot of different responses. And I think the most common response is, I agree with the Tea Party principles, but they don't necessarily want to be labeled as a Tea Party candidate. They try to kind of have it both ways. But I mean, it's definitely a discussion point, particularly in the races that are safe Republican races where we're interviewing candidates for the primary, because the primary is the race that matters. In terms of women running, I don't know that they're necessarily pitched. It's actually a similar process. This has changed over the years. I used to have a much higher threshold for meeting with candidates, meaning I wouldn't meet with just anyone. They had to prove that the district or the race was somewhat viable, because I have a limited amount of time, and I'm trying to cover a lot of different races. But after 2006, 2008, 2010, when we had wave elections and we had surprise winners, I started to lower the bar necessary where I'll meet with anyone. But I wouldn't. But coming to your original question, I think it's still about the basics of, if someone wants us to interview a candidate, they basically have to meet a minimum threshold of this race is worth watching, and it doesn't necessarily depend on whether it's a man or a woman.
And in terms of the Tea Party movement, like, how have you seen those candidates evolve as the Tea Party has grown in prominence? I'm just assuming that the candidates you get to interview, they have a lot more influence in a way. So have you noticed that? I'm just assuming here.
I mean, I guess the Tea Party has emboldened, there is definitely a anti-establishment fervor on the Republican side that is a lot deeper than what we saw in the past. I mean, a lot of candidates, it's another way of, they want to have it both ways. They want to have the support of party officials, because that can open doors for fundraising or open other doors campaign-wise. But if you are labeled as the establishment, then you just get pummeled, because you're part of the man. Put them in that cheesy quotes. So candidates coming wanting to capture the anti-establishment message, which often in the media gets labeled as Tea Party, that's grown. That's grown over the years.
But the establishment was undefeated this year.
So, and I think it's an ongoing, still the energy, I would say, is on the anti-establishment side. I mean, the NRSC did a good job dragging across Pat Roberts, who still has an issue, but
Thad Cochran. I mean, those are senators who, to my knowledge, did not even have campaign URLs when the cycle started. I mean, that's where these incumbent United States senators were starting from. Well, yeah, but what's remarkable to me, and often people ask, well, what are you surprised about? I'm surprised that senators like those, you would think if you saw Bob Bennett of Utah when he lost in the primary, actually lost before the primary at the convention, or Dick Lugar, you see your colleagues struggling because they didn't have a high-powered 21st century campaign, or they didn't fix their residency issues. You would think that if you saw your colleagues go through that, you would get yourself ready. And then some have. I mean, Mitch McConnell is a good example of someone. Orrin Hatch is a good example of someone who did. Lamar Alexander. People who, the light came on, like, all right, I better start running for my life. And they're going to be fine. Others, they're just stuck in the old ways, and they had significant problems. I'll come here first.
Just a projection question. Your thoughts on 2014 and the U.S. House, and whether anything changes there, particularly within the Republican caucus, and whether or not the Tea Party is going to tighten its, is going to expand its influence, or whether Boehner can sort of isolate them at all. Is that, or is it going to be in the Senate where we're going to come back in 6 months and it's basically nothing's changed?
So I think Republicans are going to gain seats in the House. We just don't know how many yet. I don't think there are going to be enough, say, establishment or pragmatic Republicans to significantly alter the battle within the caucus. I think we're going to have the same sort of issues between kind of the I'll say the no crowd, the crowd who just basically wants to say no to both the president and to what the Republican leadership wants. I think that struggle's still going to be there. I think that struggle's still going to be in the Senate, even though the caucus could have been significantly different if a Matt Bevin or a Chris McDaniel or a Milton Wolf or those guys had won and been a part of the caucus. They could have gotten worse, but the dynamic's still going to be Republicans could have a good election night in terms of winning seats, but the fights are still going to be the same. And coming back to, yes, that Republicans have done a good job of getting these sort of establishment figures through the Senate primaries, but if one of them loses, it's just going to all come back up. For example, if Tom Tillis loses in North Carolina, the conservative, the anti-establishment folks will just say, I told you so. Look what happened. We told you not to nominate him. You did. You nominated, just a regular, establishment guy. He lost the Senate race for us, and it's going to create more of an uproar. It doesn't matter that Greg Brannon or one of the other candidates probably would have lost too in that case. Logic does not have to matter in this in this equation. It'll just keep fanning the flames of and I don't know how it ends. The Republican struggle.
So, someone asked the question earlier, but what can be learned from how badly the media got Cantor's election wrong? Oh no!
You can both get credit.
Who asked? Was it your question
earlier?
Okay.
So we had a polling person in earlier, and she didn't really have too specific of an answer. But I mean, not the fact that he won, but just everyone was so wrong. How did that happen? And if someone wasn't wrong, who was that person?
Well, so it's a complicated. I think people say one of the common things. Well, the pundits got it wrong, and it's like honestly. I mean, we are focused on the races and the races that have a chance of flipping party hands. I mean, I've tried, and I am trying to do more in the safe primaries in the safe seats because that's where these new members of Congress are chosen. But those are, it's difficult to handicap. I mean, I've been doing this long enough to know what I know and know what I don't know, and knowing and identifying from Washington the primary dynamics is very difficult, particularly, and this gets into the Cantor, particularly in the absence of data. In that race, there was very limited data, and the data that we had was wrong, or at least it was outdated by the time we got to the election. And so I think that's the absence of data and the absence of good data was a primary reason why no one saw it. The second part is that it didn't fit neatly into the other primaries that we saw flip, meaning usually there was lots of outside group spending coming in from the Club for Growth, Senate Conservatives Fund, who do support some House candidates, Tea Party Express. You know, if you see this wave of outside spending come in, then that can contribute to a loss. That wasn't here. I mean, none of those groups were playing in the race, and so that key indicator was off the table. And I think looking back, that there was the other type of incumbents that we've seen lose primaries are ones that didn't take their race seriously. But because Cantor aired that ad, I think it was February or March, he aired an ad very early. That was an indication, I think, to some of us that, okay, he realizes he could have a real race. He's taking it seriously, and I don't know that we've seen, up before Cantor, seen a candidate take a race seriously and lose. But what we found out later is that the ad might have had the counter effect in elevating Dave Bratt's standing, and
right, because it wasn't an attack ad, and it wasn't
right, and it was a little bit loose. It was a loose connection because he was appointed to something by then Governor Tim Kaine, and it was not necessarily an effective hit, and maybe just raised his name ID above. So, you know, I think the summary is that all of the traditional indicators that we saw hinder incumbents in the past in primaries, it didn't check those boxes, and so I think that's why it was a surprise.
You mentioned you're looking to maybe push more into primaries. Is that like sort of an industry-wide movement, given the Cantor thing and sort of the Tea Party insurrection among Republicans? Do you think that we're going to see more polling and more focus on primaries going forward?
Well, I think personally, it's an effort to, if we're trying to identify the makeup, for 13 years, I think the Rothenberg report's been going on for longer than that. I mean, for years and years, it's just been, what are the most competitive races in the country that have a chance of flipping control? But now I think an added benefit that we can bring to the general political knowledge, particularly with these candidate interviews, is what type of candidate or what type of member would this person be if they were elected? And so that means trying to dive into these 5-candidate Republican primaries where, I've seen so many white male Republicans from Georgia. I have a tough time keeping them straight, but we're doing the best we can. And so I think trying to understand who's coming to Congress in order to try to figure out what might the dynamics be within the caucus, I think it's just something that I'm trying to bring that really wasn't a focus of mine before. And there's so many safe districts. That's a key part of it too. Mm-hmm.
I think also that we, as reporters, get caught up in the easy narrative too quickly. Going back to the Cantor thing, I mean, at the time you could say, okay, well, he's putting out this ad, he must be taking it seriously. But in retrospect, it might also be that he put out this ad so that people think he's taking the race seriously, and then basically didn't do jack shit the rest of the way.
Yeah. No, I mean, there was a lot of blame to be played, both on his campaigner operation, and there were other dynamics where I think the current Tea Party movement probably exposed the disconnect that he stylistically had with the district. That if the Tea Party movement if it wasn't at the height it is now, he might have still been okay. I think it might have just exposed a weakness that was already there, and ultimately was his demise.
So following up with that, as reporters, how do we try and look past the conventional wisdom with something like the Rothenberg report or Cook, which editors love to just put that in, make sure it's a toss-up, make sure it's a left-leaning, right-leaning, whatever. And it can be easy just to take that and then not, look past it and say, what are some other dynamics beyond how it's being handicapped?
I guess I view it, we're all in this together. I mean, it's a somewhat of a partnership in meaning you all will be covering races in a level of detail and seeing dynamics that I won't be able to see because I'm trying to cover so many. But I also might have more of a national perspective in terms of where the party might be focusing its resources or what other types of races might be similar to the one you're covering, and do we see those heading in a certain direction. And so I think it's, don't take what we write or anything as gospel truth. I mean, hopefully we're a useful resource, but but it's we have blind spots. We've made mistakes. I mean, I made an assumption that if the FBI comes to your house and raids your freezer and finds cash in your freezer, I made the assumption that you won't win re-election. That is a false assumption, as tested by Bill Jefferson of Louisiana, who won re-election after that scenario played out. He then lost the subsequent re-election, but that actually gave me pause even in a race now in New York's 11th district with Michael Grimm, who 19 count indictment. And we moved it to leaning Democratic, but that race is not over. It's a Staten Island based district, and he's a Staten Island politician running against a Brooklyn politician, and that's why you're seeing the DCCC independent expenditure arm. They're now on their second ad, because if you look at polling, it's not over. I think Grimm will lose in the end because his fundraising is dried up. The party, Republicans are kind of in a box. If they spend to help him, then they're spending. Democrats will pound them for trying to help an indicted member of Congress. But I guess it's lessons like that I've learned, that just to pause and not make assumptions that seem very logical. To me, the FBI, the cash in the freezer, seems like a very logical statement, and it was wrong.
Well, I think actually, I apologize.
Yep.
I think don't make assumptions is a great place to start on. And we are out of time. I'm going to give you the National Press Foundation mug.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here.
And my information is pretty...